Hello, book lovers! Welcome to the 135th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. If you're new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome. We're happy you're here. We're a group of volunteer creatives who host online literary events to help support books, authors, and the wider publishing community. Here on Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host, Joe Moldover, and I, together we shine a light on storytelling and creativity, and we always talk about indie bookstores that we love and that make our communities special. So let me take a moment to introduce our guest. Today we are joined by Katherine Reay. She's a national best-selling and award-winning author of 9 novels, including her brand new book, Shadow in Moscow, which comes out next week. Katherine has enjoyed a lifelong affair with books and history, and she brings that love to her storytelling. In addition to her fiction, she's written 1 full-length nonfiction work. She's a graduate of Northwestern University and has lived all over the country, as well as in England and Ireland. Today, she resides with her family outside Chicago. Welcome, Katherine.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, we're very happy to have you. I'm excited to talk about Shadow in Moscow. To our audience, we love getting your questions. Please feel free to drop them in the comments below the broadcast, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. And to those who are already here saying hello, welcome, welcome. Okay, so Katherine, congratulations.
So excited about it. Thank you.
Oh, you should be excited. It's a really fun read, and the reviews are great. See, Publishers Weekly calls the book nail-biting, and it goes on to say that you build an immersive world behind the Iron Curtain full of competing loyalties and a constant chilling sense of paranoia. Readers will be enthralled. And you have lots of great feedback from other writers. And Sue Messner, who we've had on the show before, she had a wonderful blurb for you. She said that your book, it has it all: intrigue, twists and turns, acts of bravery, and sacrificial love in an unforgettable Cold War setting with clever and daring women at the helm, an expertly delivered page turner by a true master of the craft. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. That's very nice.
So to our audience, Katherine and I talked a little bit before the broadcast about the fact that there are spoilers in this book, and that our goal today is not to reveal them. Right, that's the worst, when someone blows the ending of a book or the twists and turns to a movie. You want to discover that on your own. So with that very sincere goal in mind, Katherine, I'm going to invite you to explain to our audience, what is Shadow in Moscow about?
Okay. In Shadow in Moscow, you will meet 2 women. One is Austrian-born Ingrid Bauer, and she marries a young Soviet diplomat in 1955 and moves to Moscow. But she discovered is not the world she wants to pass on to her kids. This society is not one she's comfortable in, and she starts to spy for MI6. And over her 30-year period, from a little less, 1958-ish, until 1985, she becomes really all Western agencies' most valuable asset behind the Iron Curtain. And I wanted to contrast her story, which is really one that begins in that period we call the First Cold War. I wanted to contrast her with a younger spy, maybe a little more impetuous, makes some mistakes. And that's where Anya Kadnova comes in. And she is Soviet-born. But in the 1970s, the United States and the Soviet Union had the Foreign Studies Initiative, which was a cultural exchange program. So she studies at university at Georgetown University in the US. And when she returns home to the Soviet Union, to Moscow in the 1980s, she starts to spy for the CIA. And these 2 spies circle each other in Moscow as the KGB closes in on them, until Aldrich Ames in 1985 hands over his famous first list to the KGB, putting all Western assets in danger. And MI6 and the CIA are scrambling to get their spies out alive. And so that is sort of that nail-biting ending, is these 2 women trying to race it out of Moscow.
That's such a great description. Thank you for sharing that with us. I thought you did a really terrific job of blending these fictional characters with real life scandals in the spy world. Like, I found myself Googling these people, like, who is Eldrick Ames? And recently there was just a news story about Robert Hansen, who was a spy, an American who's FBI agent, right? I'm sure.
Yep.
Who spied for the Soviets, and how his obituary, he recently passed away. And I found myself reading that when I probably might not have before, but after reading your book, I'm like, oh, I have to know who this person is and how it all connects together. So I found that part of it where and that's what's great about historical fiction, right? That you can read a fictional story and you can learn something about the past.
Yeah. So the two spies, Anya and Ingrid, are absolutely fictional. But that said, even some of the things they do, I based on what real spies did. For instance, when Anya wants to reach out to the CIA, she watches a car and she throws a Pepsi can with a note inside the window. And that is exactly how a spy, Adolf Tolkachev, tried to first contact the CIA. It took him multiple times. They didn't believe him. But for the story, I cut that down. They believed her the first time. But it was really fun to not only include real events and real, sort of operations, both on the Soviet side and the American side, but to include little tidbits of real spy adventures too. So.
Was there one specific spy who inspired Anya and Ingrid, or did you take a little bit from this story and take a little bit from that story?
I did a lot of taking a little bit. There is one, and she's still alive, Martha Peterson, or is it Peterman? Peterson. I keep getting that confused sometimes in my head. Martha Peterson, who was a handler. She was not the spy, say, on the ground, but she was a handler. And so I took a lot of her story to both inform the spies, Anya and Ingrid, but also their handlers, Peter and Reginald. And so, yes, real people were involved more broadly in how I envisioned. And the handlers were really fun to explore that relationship as well. Because if you think about it, the spies who live and work in the country in which they're spying are always living that dual life. There's never anywhere that they are complete unless it's with their handler, because the handler is the only person in the whole world who knows both aspects of their reality. So it was really fun to have those kind of safe houses or safe rooms where both Ingrid and Anya could say, whew, this is who I am for this moment in time. So
your previous, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No.
I was going to ask, your previous book, The London House, has a spy storyline. And I wondered, what's the connection between the two books? Did you get inspired to write this book doing the research on that book? If you could talk a little bit about how those books are, okay, great. Talk a little bit about how those two books are connected, if at all. And then what was the spark that made you want to write this story?
Okay, it's a great question. First of all, it definitely was inspired by the London House, because I looked at all these incredible female spies that were part of the SOE, the British, Special Operations Executive in France. And then I wondered, what did they do post World War II? And so I looked at Virginia Hall, for instance, and she was the American who worked for the SOE, but then she went on to work for the CIA. So I kind of thought about all these spies and what they did next, and came across, new spies in the Cold War era. But to your question, one thing that really inspired me while I was doing these rabbit, trail into the spy world, I ran across this on history.com. And it was from the early 1940s. And this is a quote. When interviewed by American officials, one European intelligence officer said, "An agent should be calm, unostentatious, and reticent. Women are emotional, vain, loquacious. They fall in love easily and without discrimination. They are impatient with the strict requirements of security measures. They withstand hardships poorly." That is the absolute opposite of everything I read about female spies. And I thought, challenge accepted. So I kept digging in about all this courage and determination and resourcefulness. And Ingrid and Anya came out of that.
Oh, I love that. I love that the misogyny inspired your book.
There you go.
How can I prove them wrong? Oh, we need more of that. Excellent.
But like every touch point in history proved that statement wrong.
It's true. It's true. I think of all the professions where that quote, not just spies, doctors, police officers, mothers, anything. That quote's terrible. So that's wonderful that you took that deeply, deeply patronizing comment and turned it into this story about two very, very strong women. Do you remember the first scene that you wrote in the book? When you were that very first draft, what was it? Where did you start? Do you remember? And then I'm curious if it stayed in this final publication.
It didn't stay.
Okay.
You meet Ingrid at the tail end of World War II. And the first scene in the book actually, for me, and I think I was just sort of setting Ingrid up in my mind, but it was much earlier in World War II when Ingrid's mother started to spy for MI6 in Vienna against the Nazis. And so Ingrid was younger. She was watching her mom. She didn't understand because her mom was keeping things secret, as spies do. And so those were the first scenes written. But when I was really struggling just internally as where does this story begin, I realized that wasn't where it began. And so all of that became just sort of my own moments of writing, kind of front matter that never made it into the final book.
That's such an interesting explanation for our audience, because I think readers, when they sit with a book, they just assume it started with page one, right? But the process for every author can be very different.
Yeah. And with every book.
And every book, right. Oh, it's fascinating. Yeah. When you were researching spies, was there a fact that you came across that you thought, oh, I can't believe this is true? You were just so surprised by it, that something that you thought, I mean, other than the Pepsi can, which is like crazy that's how somebody tried to get out of the CIA.
But there's so many great stories like that. I couldn't even go into them all. Okay, so one thing that I thought was really hilarious, there was a spy, Oleg Gordievsky, and Aldrich Ames actually, I believe they think he outed him as well, gave his name to the KGB. But anyway, so he's MI6 is racing to get him out in the boot of a car, the trunk of a car. And they get to a checkpoint, and there are dogs and there are soldiers, and the people driving him out are pretty sure that they're going to get caught. And so the woman has a baby in the back seat, and she changes the baby's diaper and smacks the dirty diaper on the back hood of the car, which disguises the scent.
So
and
smart.
The dogs sniff at the diaper and walk on. I mean, just like crazy stories like that. But there's another, like Operation Ryan, and I can't quite remember the Russian name of it, and I'm going to have to get that in my brain. But it was an operation in the 80s. The KGB was paying officers to find, details, evidence that the U.S. was starting a first attack initiative, and they were being rewarded for that. And so, of course, a lot of false information was coming in, and it just sort of, it struck me as nonsensical that you would want to create this frenzy in your own country, but that's what they were basically doing by rewarding false tips.
Interesting. Wow, that diaper story is crazy.
Yeah, the diaper story is crazy.
Another example of how that quote is just so wrong, right? That's just like, women are very clever. There, that's my comment on that one. So one of the things I was really struck by, I've never been to Russia before, but I felt very immersed in the world in which Anya and Ingrid live in, this Cold War, Soviet Union, world of deprivation and fear. And I wonder about your experience going to Russia. Am I correct that you've been there once?
Been there once. I went in 1985, which is the year the book ends. Yeah. I did not get to return for research, but I have memories of that time and memories of, just walking around and seeing soldiers, et cetera, and what that felt like. And it was actually a really good sort of place to leave that, because everything changed in 1991. I mean, park names, street names, city names, all changed post 1991. And so I had to make sure all my maps and my research and everything really was pre 1991. And so I did a lot to make sure I had that immersive experience, both reading fiction and nonfiction. I actually read a lot of fiction, like Gorky Park and some not Frederick Forsyth. Frederick Forsyth? Huh? Anyway, now I'm having trouble with someone else's name. A lot of novels that took place in the mid 80s.
Okay. But it's wonderful that you were able to draw upon your trip there as a reference for creating the mood and the environment. Wonderful. So there is this theme in the book, at least for me, there was a theme about freedom. So this idea, the lack of freedom. Anya, when she goes to the United States, has so much freedom, and she describes that experience of being in America to a friend as like going to a store where there's dozens and dozens and dozens of sweaters you can choose from, as opposed to where they live in the Soviet Union, where there's like one sweater and it's like in the back of someone's trunk and it's the black market and you have no choice. It might not fit. You hate the color. It doesn't matter because you need a sweater. And how there's so much choice and there's so much opportunity in America, and that doesn't exist, and how you have to adjust to that. And almost that's overwhelming to have so much choice, right? And there's freedom in that. And I felt like Ingrid spent a lot of the book talking about, I'm trying to phrase this so I don't give away spoilers, but how there's not a lot of freedom externally, but there's freedom internally. And this idea, you're nodding. So this idea of how we can create our own interior life to be a place of freedom and opportunity and choice, and we can control our thoughts and our loves and our beliefs. And I found that really interesting, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about this idea of freedom or lack thereof, and how it's woven into the book.
Yes, I absolutely can. I'm going to go back to Anya real quick when she was describing, and it was just a very visual way to describe it. So she does say to her friend Sonia, there's sweaters of every color. And so Sonia laughs and says, it's about sweaters, because, she thinks, consumerism, Western, it's just about the materials. But what Anya's saying is, she says, no, take that and now internalize it to thoughts. You can have those wide variety of thoughts, and you can express them. And not only that, you can hold contradicting thoughts.
Yes.
Both can be true because you can debate them, etc. So it was sort of an external becoming an internal. But you're right. Then Ingrid has this other idea, and both also are true, external and internal freedoms, that you can assign, say value or reality to a stricture depending on how you perceive it. Meaning, Ingrid never gives up trying to change the system. And yet she refuses to let the system define the fact, that she is curtailed, if that makes sense.
Yep.
By accepting that as reality, she can then work to change the reality.
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting exploration. No, it's a really interesting exploration of how people thrive within political structures that do not necessarily value their voice or their independent thought or their freedom, their individuality. And I thought that part, that sort of psychological picture of freedom is really important, because I think sometimes you think, like, why would someone live there? Like, why wouldn't they just leave? And I think, right? Like, why would they do everything possible to get out of that environment? And I think that part of the book, that sort of explanation and that exploration also of those issues are really, I think it's really well done. And it's really, like, it made me think a lot about the internal versus the external. And anyway, I thought that was great. So
thank you.
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks for talking about it with me. Another thing I thought you did really well in this book was tension. I mean, I ended this book thinking, I do not ever want to be a spy. Like, it's so stressful, right? I think you said it earlier, this idea that handlers are the only ones who know the duality that these spies have. But everything, like, there are scenes in the book where they have to do notify their handlers they want a meeting, or their handlers need to notify
Yes.
them. And there's these complicated steps they go through. And like all of that was just so stressful. Like, what if you missed it? What if you didn't understand it? What if you were 5 minutes late? What if, like, so, and then getting caught, and then living with that perpetual fear of getting caught. And oh my gosh, I thought the tension and the suspense in this book, and
you're right. It played on them every moment, because every aspect of society is watched, and at any moment they could be caught. And there are points where both spies have compromising information within their homes.
Yes.
And, they hide them in different places. That absolutely happened and was regular, and would be terrifying. But yeah.
How do you, as a writer, establish an environment in a novel where there is this constant threat of I mean, these characters live in a constant threat of arrest, torture, death. And so there is this constant sort of drumbeat of suspense and tension. How do you create that, but balance it in such a way that the reader is like, doesn't give up, right? You want to hook them and keep them, like, kind of pull them in. How do you do that? What's your approach?
Well, it's interesting that it's almost like maybe a roller coaster.
Yeah.
In the sense that you do have to have those highs, but you have to give moments of rest. Or the reader, it's too much stress, both for characters, for you as the writer, but also for the reader, who you really want to please. And so there are those moments, there's those moments of rest. And for me, for these women, it often came with their handlers, when they could sit down and kind of understand the larger picture. There's a scene, I really love it, when in the early 1970s, there was the Washington Summit and the Moscow Summit, where the very top echelon of the governments of the US and Moscow got together during the détente years. And there's this scene where Ingrid goes to her handler, Reginald, and she's in a safe house, and she's overjoyed because she thinks that both nations will stand down with nuclear weapons. And she thinks something wonderful has been accomplished. Now, of course, Reginald has to explain to her that that's not the way the real world will work. But it is a little moment of rest before she walks out that door and something else happens again. So it is sort of a game between rest and tension and stress and joy.
That's a great point. And even in those scenes when they're with the handlers, I forget which character was meeting with which handler, but they were in an apartment in a safe house meeting, and you write that they sat in the kitchen where there wasn't a window. And so it was just this, like, I remember that I triggered, like, oh yeah, because you're reminding us of this, like, even though we're in this moment that it's safe, there's this constant threat outside that is not safe, and that they're always in danger. So I thought that was done well. One of the things, there's a big twist at the end. It's a great ending. I found myself very sad at the end, like, oh, like, one of those endings you're like, oh, I wish that wasn't the ending, but then like, oh, that is actually the right ending. So just for our readers who are going to pick this book up, it's a great ending. And I wonder, do you know your endings when you start writing? Are you an author who has it all? Like, oh, I see how this book is going to end, and I just have to get there, or does the ending come to you as you write?
It's a little bit of both. Oddly enough, I know how each character is going to feel at the end.
Oh, interesting.
So what the physical situation is that's going to get them there, I'm not entirely sure at the beginning, but I absolutely know what, price each is going to pay, what joy each is going to find, how they're going to feel at the end of the book. And so it's very emotional driven for me.
Excellent.
But I do get those plot points settled fairly early.
Yes, but I love that idea of knowing the feeling. That's really great. When I was doing my research for today, I realized that you have written many different novels. We said 9 novels. This is your ninth written novels, 10 books altogether. And you've written nonfiction, contemporary fiction, historical fiction. Do you have a preference? Is there one genre that you love above all others? Do you even think about genre when you sit down with the story? Is that on your mind?
I do think a little about genre, meaning that my next book will be historical fiction, and I expect the next one after that to be historical fiction. I'm loving historical fiction, and I don't want to jump all over the place because, as you've just said, there's contemporary, there's a nonfiction. I guess I'm in my historical fiction phase. But I have so many different interests and so many things I want to explore that I have been, I've been so pleased that both the contemporary, the nonfiction, and the historical fiction have found, publishing homes, etc. And so I like that. I think I'm very happy in the historical fiction at the moment. The one genre you'll never see me in is horror. I scare myself. So yes. I won't be there.
Yes. I'm not a horror person. I will say that we've had a couple horror authors on the show, and I've read, and I realized that genre is very broad.
It is. Absolutely.
It completely terrifying, and then it can lean more
to completely terrifying.
Yeah. But I too am like, ugh. I think I read Pet Sematary when I was like 13, and that was it. I was done. It's scary.
Yeah. I got through. My daughter really loved it.
Oh yeah.
I think I got to page 12. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, I'm out.
So this show is called Authors Love Bookstores. And so we do want to take a moment to talk about bookstores. And I know that you have several favorites. So we'd love to hear about a couple of your favorite bookstores. And then especially we want to hear about which bookstores might have signed copies of Shadow in Moscow. Again, it's coming out next week. We're going to drop links to purchase all of Katherine's books, but definitely a Shadow in Moscow. So tell us about, do you have an indie bookstore near where you live that you love, or across the country?
I do. My hometown, Lake Forest, Illinois, has a fantastic indie bookstore, Lake Forest Bookstore, and they will absolutely have signed copies, and they can mail them out, which is a beautiful service, and they're just a wonderful group there. At the moment, I am actually in Montana, and Bozeman on Main Street has a fabulous The Country Bookshelf.
Yes.
And it's a fabulous shop too. And I'm going to give a talk there in early July, and they will have signed copies too. When I go to the airport tomorrow, I'll stop in and see if they got some early. So they might have signed next week, but otherwise they will be there early July. Another favorite bookstore of mine, my grandparents lived in northern Michigan, and there's a bookstore there in Petoskey, Michigan called McLean and Aiken. And when I was young, they used to put an armchair in the window. And if you read for an hour in the display window, you could keep the book. And I did that a few times when I was like 8 years old. Love that bookstore. And I'm going to give a talk there and a signing in mid-July as well. So they will have signed books.
Great.
So I could go on with a few more stores.
Well, I want to just say that we have had the country shelf, the country bookshelf.
Yep.
We've had them on the show, and we'll include the link before, so people want to check that out. And we've also had McLean and Aiken on as well. So did I say that right, McLean?
Yeah, McLean and Aiken.
Again, we've had them on the show, and we'll put the link below.
Good.
So people can go check it out. And we're also going to include a link to your events page on your website. So
thank you.
Go check that out. You have a lot of events coming up. You just mentioned a couple, but there's more. So for anyone who is like intrigued by this book, it's a perfect read for the summer. I mean, any season, but I think it will be like, if you're sitting on the beach, it'll be less stressful if you have some sunshine. But then I think it'd be good if you were sitting up in front of a fire in the winter, drinking some hot cocoa, maybe some vodka. It takes place in Russia after all.
Very good.
So we'll put all those links below. So definitely check them out. Have you ever had, you've had so many books come out. Can you think about what was your favorite author event? Because that's one of the best things about indie bookstores. Is there one that kind of?
Okay, so there have been lots, but there is one I did for the London House, and I'm going to do it again. It's next week or the week after. M. Judson Booksellers in Greenville, South Carolina. They do a drinks with authors, and so everybody comes. And with the London House, it was like a London fog sort of tea and bourbon drink, I think. And this one is going to be a Moscow Mule. And I just think that's really fun. It's in the evening from like 7:30 to 9, and the place fills up, and it is such a fabulous bookstore. Just books everywhere and a really neat open space. And so I think that's a lot of fun. And I love when book talks are paired with something else. Makes it feel very celebratory.
Exactly. That's wonderful. When we think about this career of writing that you have had with all of these books, I'm wondering what kind of a reader were as a child? I mean, obviously we know tenacious because you sat in that chair for an hour to get your free book. Do you remember what the book was that you got?
Oh, around that age, it probably was Encyclopedia Brown or The Great Brain or was it Tales of the Fourth Grade Nothing?
Ah, best
Um,
book ever.
yeah, it was probably one of those.
Okay.
Those are a few of my favorites, or The High King or anything by Lloyd Alexander.
Oh, our producer is really happy because he likes Lloyd Alexander. Joe loves that.
Lloyd Alexander was the first author I ever wrote to, and I was probably in 5th grade, and he wrote me back, and I still have it. I mean, he died many years ago, but I love that.
When did you decide you wanted to become a writer?
I always thought no, I didn't. I thought I'd be a professor. I thought I'd be a teacher. But I wrote my first book. I started writing in 2009. And yeah, I've been writing since then, but it's sort of like a second career. I went into marketing and did that for a few years and then started writing.
And was there a book from your childhood? We just talked about Lloyd Alexander, Judy Blume, Encyclopedia Brown. Were there other books from your childhood when you think about the writer you are now? Were there books that really shaped your perspective and your point of view?
Definitely. I loved I really have a fantasy bent to my personality, which is interesting because I don't write fantasy at all. But that is kind of obviously world creating. I loved the Narnia stories. One thing I love about C.S. Lewis is no word is wasted. Everything has meta theme and, theme under theme under theme. And that definitely has influenced my writing because what I say on the surface is often not what I'm saying 2-3 layers underneath. Yeah. So I love that. And I've definitely learned that from him. I read Jane Austen, to be honest, at a very young age. And I love the way you can think it's just a little scene in a sitting room, and often it is. But the implications on society and the satire and the comedy around it are huge. And I think that's amazing too. I started reading her probably in the 6th grade.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of others. Really I read a lot as a kid.
And I think it's important how you're describing these books and these authors, and you're showing to us how those books have taught you to be the writer you are today. I think that's like such an important lesson. I have kids who want to be better writers, and I always say you should be reading more because that's right. It's always how you learn to write is how you learn to read first.
And take your time in reading, in the sense that you can read by a sentence really quick and you think that's a nice sentence. And then you slow down and you're like, whoa, that sentence has 3 layers underneath it. And he's saying something entirely different. And I think that's what really opened up the world to me, of sort of theme, micro tension, misdirect, deeper layers, the whole, and it comes out in that whole idea of internal freedom. Sometimes that isn't stated, but by the choices Ingrid makes, you can tell what principles she's operating under.
And she's found a way to be strong and to be herself despite.
To not lose hope. Yeah.
Actually, I'm so glad you said that because that is how I found her. I found her to be incredibly optimistic despite everything. And that's really, I think, a strong element of this book is the ways we find optimism despite the very challenging circumstances we might be in. So speaking of things that we find optimism from, of course, are books. And I'm wondering what you're reading now. Because our audience always wants to know what the author is reading.
Yeah. So I just finished a book by Annabelle Moynihan called Nora Goes Off Script. Yes. And she actually just published a book yesterday, I think same time next summer. And I need to get my hands on that because I loved Nora. It just made me laugh out loud. And that was really kind of fun. Just rom-com, but poignant story as well. So I enjoyed that. And then my daughter called me up yesterday and she asked about Hamnet, Maggie O'Farrell. And I have read that and I was like, that's a reminder. I need to go back, because that is an author I think writes beautifully.
Yes.
Just an incredible writer. So I need to find another of hers.
I interviewed Maggie Hamnet for A Mighty Blaze, and we've had her on twice actually for Hamnet and then for her newer book, The Marriage Portrait. So we're going to include the links to those interviews below so people can check them out. She's amazing.
Amazing.
I shouldn't say if, I should say when our audience finishes A Shadow in Moscow and they think, I'm hooked, I want to know more about espionage during the Cold War and spies, what book or books would you recommend that they check out? Doesn't necessarily have to be fiction, though of course if you have other fiction books that
there's so many. I think it's Sonia, it's either Purcell or Parnell, sorry about that, but Woman of No Importance is the story of Virginia Hall, spy during World War II. Amazing book. She does an extraordinary job. I have two, I happen to have them with me. Ben McIntyre is fabulous. He has written lots of books on lots of different spies, and he just does a really good job. And so The Spy and the Traitor I really enjoyed, but that's not the only spy that he has written about. So I highly recommend that one. And on my website, as of this weekend, when I finally pull it together, I will have almost all the books I read during this whole research process. And each and every one I thoroughly enjoyed and would recommend.
Okay, great. We'll put links to your website below to go check those out. We have a couple audience questions.
Oh, good.
Okay, here's one. Are you planning to write other books about spies, perhaps American spies? You mentioned you have two more books coming up. Are they about spies?
I have one. It's called The Berlin Letters, and it's coming out March of 2024. And the protagonist is an American woman who works for the CIA. And it takes place again during the Cold War. It starts the day the Berlin Wall goes up, and the whole book takes place within the last week, actually, of the Berlin Wall standing, and it ends the night it falls. And so, yes, there's an American spy in that book, and I'm really, really excited about it.
Excellent. Okay, here's another one. What's your favorite historical period that you haven't yet written about?
Ooh, favorite question? That's a tough one. Because if I could think of it, I'd go write about it. That's really interesting. Favorite historical period I haven't written about yet. I have not written, it's interesting. It's the same historical period I've written within the Cold War, but I'm intrigued lately about other aspects of history within the 60s and the 70s that have nothing to do with spies and politics, just the culture. And so I'm intrigued by that at the moment. So maybe I'll head there next. I'm trying to think of other historical periods. I find a lot of different times very, very interesting. The interwar years I find fascinating. The tension of coming out of World War I, yet almost this false peace that everyone wants to believe will last forever, when all of the sort of blocks are in place leading right to World War II. So that's a really interesting period as well.
And we probably think about that slightly differently now that we're emerging from a COVID pandemic, right? Because I don't know that when we talk about those interwar periods, do we talk about, the pandemics of 1918? Was that something we would always think about so much? I mean, I would imagine now that's a different flavor to our approach to that time period. Great. Thank you for those questions. I'm wondering, what do you hope readers take from your novel when they get to the end of A Shadow in Moscow? What do you want them to be thinking about or feeling?
There is a lot that happens in this book, as we've alluded to, but I really do. I want readers to walk away with a sense of hope, a sense that we have had throughout history. And, the London House, when it was talking about World War II, had that too. We have had dark times in history, and unfortunate things have happened to people, but the human nature is resilient and it is optimistic. And so I do want readers to walk away with hope and a feeling of honestly, courage. That hope imbued with courage. I think that's a really sort of great feeling to carry around right now.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. We need more of that. We need more hope. We
Yeah.
need more courage.
Yeah.
You also show us how the individual can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think we forget that sometimes, because I definitely do. I'm like, I'm one little person. What can I do? But individuals can make a big difference, and I think that is super important to remember.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Catherine, thank you so much for being with us today and for talking about Shadow in Moscow.
Thank
Really
you.
loved chatting with you. I
So
love
excited about this story.
I'm happy for you. I know this is you're in this wonderful moment of the books coming out next week and all that, like
Yes,
excitement and joy, and
it is
I
so
hope
fun.
everyone. I'm sorry, go say it. What did I
No, I
say?
was just saying it's so fun, and I'm going on tour starting next Tuesday, and my son is heading back to law school in the fall, and so he took some time off work and he's driving me around, and I think that's a ton of fun too.
Oh,
I'm
that's
really excited about that
wonderful.
experience.
Oh, that you're gonna have a great time. That's
Yeah.
gonna be fantastic. Well, I hope you enjoy your book tour with your son. And to our audience, please go check out A Shadow in Moscow. Again, links below in the comments where you can pick up your own. You can pre-order it now because it's out next week. But we give you a bunch of stores you can get it from, signed copies. They'll ship it to you. And perfect for book clubs. I forgot to say that at the top. If you're in a book club, there's wonderful questions in the back of the book to inspire your discussion, and there's a lot in this book for you to grab hold of. And
And I will also, on my website, as soon as I get it all loaded, because I do all that myself, I'll have a book club kit on there, which will help even further and sort of behind the scenes things that I felt about the book, etc. So
terrific. Definitely go check that out to our audience. And to our audience, if you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events. Or if you're not a Facebook person, hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our newsletter. It goes out once a week and gives you the rundown of all of our author interviews. And we will be back next week at June 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern time for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. We're going to have a YA panel talking about some great summer reads for you to check out. Please tune in. And until we meet again, be well and keep reading. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
thank you.